Welcome to Psalms Layer by Layer, a project of Cambridge Digital Bible Research. I'm Elizabeth. This video introduces our grammatical diagram for Psalm 1. The grammatical diagram takes all the morphological and syntactic grammatical relationships in Hebrew and makes them visual. Please see our video on grammatical diagramming if this is new to you. Verse 1 in Psalm 1 is notorious for the fact that it is a sentence fragment and not a full sentence. It opens with a construct chain, the happiness of the man, which we might translate as happy the man, or, as in our close but clear translation, happy is the man. According to its morphology, it's just an expression, as in, oh, the happiness of the man. According to its use, it seems more like happy is the man. It may be, in this case, that the morphology is misleading, and it's what is called a frozen form. It's diagrammed here, however, as a clear construct chain. In the rest of verse 1, the diagram here shows that there's a relative clause, the man who, which has three different predicates. It's the man who does not walk, does not stand, and does not settle. One thing that stands out is the similar structure for all these clauses. They're all negated, and they all have prepositional phrases modifying the verb, telling us the location for the action of the verb. In each case, the location, as in counsel, conduct, or dwelling place, is modified by a construct chain, showing whose counsel, conduct, or dwelling place. The first two have adjectives, which we gloss as wicked people and sinful people. The last is a participle that's become a full noun, so on its own it can mean insolent people. The parallel syntax provides the opportunity for poetic exploitation, as we see the pattern of three verbs, walk, stand, settle, three nouns for a location of sorts, counsel, conduct, dwelling place, and three groups to whom these belong, the wicked, sinful, and insolent. The similarity in syntax prompts a closer look, which in this case happens at our semantics layer with the imagery and the progression from walk to stand to settle. Do note that this grammatical diagram explicitly disregards word order, which is handled at our macro syntax layer. But is a floating particle, which means its function is handled at the discourse layer, again in macro syntax. It is not grammatically attached to a particular sentence. Now we have proper sentences, even if our first is verbless. His delight is in the instruction of the Lord. The his here goes back to the man above, but the connection is not syntactic, so it's not marked here. We track co-reference in our participant analysis. Notice that the prepositional phrase, in the instruction of the Lord, is modifying an empty slot. This here is known as a locative clause, in which something like the adjective located is implied. So we could say that his delight is located in the instruction of the Lord. It remains a verbless clause, but one that's expressing location. And he rehearses his instruction day and night. With the English gloss rehearse, taken from the Semantic Dictionary of Biblical Hebrew, we end up turning the prepositional phrase into a direct object. The Hebrew preposition is the same, however, as all the other in words so far. The day and night are known as adverbial accusatives, which means they're nouns that are being used as adverbs, providing the time when the rehearsing happens. The dotted line, continuing to join clauses, shows us that verse 3 is connected to verse 2 by the conjunction and. The subject is still the same man, who will now become like a tree. Be versus become is a matter of verbal semantics, not morphology, so look for that distinction there. The prepositional phrase here is put on a pedestal, showing that it's a full phrase filling a single slot on the baseline. In this case, the slot is for a predicate adjective. It's the same structure as in the sentence, he will become obedient, with an ordinary predicate adjective. Here, the prepositional phrase is taking on the same role as the predicate adjective. This tree is one transplanted on streams of water. See our lexical semantics for why this is transplanted rather than simple planted. The transplanted is diagrammed with a curved modifying line, showing that it's a participle. In this case, it's a passive participle. The tree is modified by a relative clause, in the next clause, since it's the tree which gives its fruit in season. In the Hebrew, the relative particle asher is not really a pronoun, so it's a tree that it gives its fruit in its time. The idea of its time is best glossed in English with season, and ordinary English drops the its to just say in season. And its leaf does not wither. There are many pronominal suffixes here, all glossed its. The discourse and poetic layers will address if there's a reason for the repetition. Here we just diagram it. These next two clauses are the trickiest in the psalm. As diagrammed here, the subject is implicit, and the nearest candidate is the tree, so it would be, the tree makes successful all that it does. In participant analysis, we address whether it really is the tree, or whether it is the man who makes successful all that he does. Because the tree is a metaphor for the man, that's not too much of a stretch. There is a third option. The Lord, introduced in verse 2 with his instruction, could be the implied subject, such that it's the Lord makes successful all that he, as in the man or tree, does. Noting ambiguities like this here provide more opportunities for poetic devices such as multiple meanings. The tree succeeds in everything is a pleasing image of a luscious tree. The poetic implication is that the man who devotes himself to the instruction of the Lord will likewise succeed in everything, a basic poetic strategy to persuade the reader. But a further step is that, upon meditation, especially after verse 6, the reader might conclude that it was the Lord who was actually causing everything to succeed in the first place. The point here is that grammatical ambiguities are poetic opportunities. This grammatical diagram is the place to begin identifying them. In verse 4, we have another sentence fragment, but we can piece it together into a full sentence. The wicked are not so. As in, there's no saying, happy the wicked who. This second sentence fragment, not so the wicked, has obvious discourse potential at the macro syntax level. There we track, for example, what marks the beginning of a new section. Rather, like the chaff that the wind drives away. The Masoretic vowel on the preposition like indicates that chaff is here understood as definite, which in English would be the chaff. The gray article on the diagram indicates the definiteness. Hebrew poetry often drops articles, as it does relative particles, but we see quite a few here in Psalm 1. More opportunities for poetic exploration. Note that wind drives it away is the only complete clause in verse 4. Hebrew poetic language loves to embody the message, and it's worth considering if the grammatical connectedness, even tree-like expansion in verses 1 to 3, is intentionally contrasted with the sentence fragments in verse 4, with the only clause being the actual driving away of the wicked. It's almost as if some of the words were driven away, and we have to piece together what's left. Verse 5. Therefore is marked as particle, thus left for macro syntax to explore. Wicked will not stand firm in the trial, and sinful will not stand in the congregation of the righteous. We can note the same structure as in verse 1, with locative prepositional phrases, and the second even has a construct chain with an adjective. The syntax connects verses 1 and 5. In the second half of verse 5, there are two words in gray and in brackets. These are elided words, which are supplied from the context. This is not a verbless clause, as where there is no verb specified at all, but rather the verb and the negation are understood to be continued from the first line. The vowel before trial, often translated court or judgment, again indicates definiteness, so we again have a definite article in gray. The meaning of the trial, however, has caused no end of discussion. If it's the trial, is that talking about ordinary judgment courts or an end-of-time judgment day? Here at the grammatical layer, we can raise the question, but we look to semantics to answer it. This one is controversial enough to have a full argument map devoted to it. Verse 6. The grammatical diagram analyzes the for here as a discourse particle and not as a subordinating conjunction, which is its more common use. That is, it's not saying that the wicked will not stand in judgment for or because the Lord cares for the way of the righteous. Rather, it's saying that all of verses 1 through 5, or some portion of it, is true for or because the Lord does what he does. Putting it on its own line enables leaving verse 6 as an independent sentence and lets macrosyntax figure out the larger connections. Here, where the Lord cares for the way of the righteous, we again have a semicircle, this time imposed on top of the normal verbal slot. This indicates a participle being used as a normal predicate, as if it were a finite verb, even though it isn't. The visual display is to make clear the twofold reality. It is a participle, but it's acting as if it were finite. It's up to semantics to decide if there's any significance in terms of tense, aspect, mood, or other verbal features, as well as explaining why cares for is the gloss compared to other English translations. The way of the wicked will come to an end. Not the most comforting end to the psalm in its terseness. The grammar is as terse as the wording, with no prepositional phrases or additional modifiers. The poet may have wanted even the grammar to indicate the waning of the wicked, to signal in yet one more way to the reader that wickedness does not lead to success. This has been the grammatical diagram of Psalm 1. Please visit cdbr.org for more information, as this is just the beginning of a mountain of research. Thanks for watching.